I think it is immoral for a creator being to set up a system in which people would end up suffering forever after that creator being created those people. Yes, free will exists. Free will was created by God according to Christian understanding. Everyone who is going to be on these paths of eternal torture were created with the knowledge and understanding by a supposedly perfectly moral creator being, and that logic doesn't track to then therefore create them, know that they would supposedly use their free will for eternal damnation.
Hello everybody, this is a video of an atheist challenging Christians on whether or not hell is unethical. Is it immoral? Is it moral? Is God a bad guy? Is he a good guy? So have a look at the arguments, decide for yourself who you think won, and of course I'm going to give you my personal insights from a spiritual perspective, non-dual perspective too. But I must say I think the atheist cooked in this video.
The concept of the Christian hell is both illogical and immoral. So two parts here. Illogical, I think from that, I really find the idea of omniscience with God, which is the Christian God is everywhere. And also the Christian understanding of hell is defined as a separate, well, in many definitions, defined as a separation from God. I don't think that that is logical. It doesn't make sense in the parameters of that logic. And then immoral, I do not see any moral justification for an eternity of torture. Again, this is the widest understanding of the Christian hell. We are totally open to talk about different iterations. There are other kinds of hell, but from the majority of the understanding of Christian hell, illogical and immoral.
A part of your argument speaks to the proportionality of punishment, and I wanted to bring you back to some real-life examples of punishment that are not exactly commensurate to the proportionality of the time that it took to commit the crime. I like to say that I have a prosecutorial background. I was a prosecutor for a few years, so I understand how crimes are done, and a lot of things are taken into consideration when determining that proportionality. For example, if a criminal walks into the court and they have a history of doing that same crime, we do what's called enhancing their punishment. Because they have a history of doing the same thing, we get to take that into context. And I think what happens is when this conversation comes up as it relates to the proportionality specifically, I cannot say that word today.
I suggest she's messing up her words because she's doing too much. She's trying to think of her rehearsed answer. I say this because she's a good speaker. She's articulate. I've seen her before, but she's not thinking simply. She's doing too much.
We like to reduce crimes against God, which is what the Christian understands as sin, to these instances and these moments and these minor things. But in reality, all sin and all wrongdoing is sin against an eternal God. So if you sin against an eternal God, I do think it naturally follows that there are eternal consequences associated with that. Even when you look at the crimes that are done against certain public figures, like as a previous prosecutor, there's a different sentencing range for harm against a prosecutor or against a judge. And
what Christians don't understand when they say things like this is they are implying that we, finite people, can affect an infinite, all-powerful God in some way, shape, or form, and that makes no sense.
Not because they're better than anyone, but it's because of what they represent. If a judge is representing the law and enacting the law, if a crime that is done against the judge is measured out, it is a defiance against the law itself. So when you say that it is, I guess, illogical to have the punishment be eternal when we are talking about an eternal God, I think it fails to take into those things into consideration. And I also want to say one thing that people may not always consider is the inertia of the soul. If, for example, someone hates God, who's to say they're going to stop hating God for eternity? The idea is that my position here on earth is only a precursor of what my position and my perspective is going to be for an eternity. And if God is a God that is loving, I think the most loving thing that he could do is to respect a person's free will. If you didn't want God in the past, why would it make sense for you to want God in the future?
Of course it makes sense that somebody could change their mind to seek God at some point. Isn't that the whole thing of Christianity, that people were once lost and then they find Jesus and then share their testimony? Of course you can change your mind to seek God. Of course that makes sense. She's being disingenuous, I believe.
we have to understand that naturally we are eternal. We have an eternal soul. And so we're gravitating towards eternity. It just depends on where we're going. And the things that I stated before are things that I think we have to take into consideration.
So I'm not sure that again, this is kind of going into because we have free will, therefore this scope and magnitude of suffering, in this case in the case of hell, resonates. I'm not sure that tracks because, again, this goes back to another component of the concept of the Christian hell being immoral is because I think it is immoral for a creator being to set up a system in which people would end up suffering forever after that creator being created those people. Yes, free will exists. Free will was created by God according to Christian understanding. Everyone who is going to be on these paths of eternal torture were created with the knowledge and understanding by a supposedly perfectly moral creator being, and that logic doesn't track to then therefore create them, know that they would supposedly use their free will for eternal damnation. And again, we are finite beings. There are atrocities that are committed on this world that are felt for generations. I mean, generations upon generations of time due to one person in some cases or a multitude of people and their actions and their choices. That is certainly not to be downplayed. There is no conceptualization of an eternity, of a never-ending amount of time that is justifiable for even generations, because it's long for us to think of generations of harm, but that is nothing. It's literally nothing in the face of an eternity. So why would a creator being who is supposedly perfectly moral create these people knowing and creating them anyway? Not just that they were going to be damned forever. I guess we'll stick with the prompt, that they'll be damned forever. I don't think that's moral.
For the same reason that anyone procreates, when you have a baby, you know that there's a possibility that this child could grow up to be a Hitler or they could grow up to be a Martin Luther King. But because of the outpouring of love that you have in your heart for you and possibly your spouse, you decide to procreate, make a child, essentially like God did, making us in his own image. So God does see the future. God is also loving. And because of the outpouring of love that he had, he made a decision to have creation, to have them made. And as a result of that, one thing that I won't say it's dismissive, but one thing that you kind of just skirt to the side is the fact that we being created in his image necessarily means that just as he has volition, we have volition. So if God is loving and he wants to have pure love reciprocated back, it's necessarily free will is necessary to that equation. We can't just be created without any real meaningful choice. Otherwise, you claim that you want to be a robot, but I don't believe that. You're too passionate. You're very passionate. You're very articulate. You think things through. I don't believe, obviously that's a hypothetical, but I don't believe that you would be comfortable with not having a free will for the sake of not having sin or consequences or suffering like in the past prompt. So that's to answer that specific point.
I was saying that I would give up my free will for the sake of any and all of other people's suffering. It wasn't really like my personal circumstances. But again, going back to the free will, I don't think that an all-powerful God is limited at all, right, conceptually. So the parents, that's what it was. So you were saying it's just like a parent having a child and not knowing if they were going to be Hitler or Martin Luther King Jr. Many differences there, but probably the key one for this argument is that God would know. God would know and therefore would end up intentionally, I guess, creating Hitler.
Yes, the Christian God created Hitler, for sure. And the Muslim God and the Jewish God all created Hitler, 100%. Because their God knew exactly what would happen if they created the universe or if it created the universe and still did it anyway.
So I don't agree with like that analogy. I understand your point. And, we can have a separate conversation about justice in general. But my question was, is there free will in heaven?
Free will in heaven?
Yeah.
I thought we were talking about hell.
Right. This is related.
Yes, there's free will in heaven. But
there is free will in heaven.
Yes, there's free will everywhere.
To turn away from the Creator?
Yes, to turn away.
Okay, so this concept of eternity and eternal bliss is not accurate according to Christian understanding?
Well,
you could leave heaven?
Well, yeah, you can get kicked out of heaven.
You can get kicked out of heaven.
So,
okay, I didn't know that. I don't think that's the general understanding of the Christian heaven and hell, so we might be having a different conversation.
I disagree with that. I would say that in heaven, when you reach that place, your will is surrendered and your will is united with the will of God. So there's not a need or a desire to have a will in that sense. It's extrapolating what we have here onto the heavenly realm.
So we're talking about the surrender of free will. Okay, so that's kind of my point here. And also I would like to point out that apparently God can create a perfect utopia where people have sort of a surrender of free will, which is still a choice, which is technically free will. So again, the logic of a heaven and hell really does break down with that.
You see, in a nutshell, an all-powerful, self-sustaining, all-knowing, infinite God would have to be responsible for literally everything, because that which is finite has no power within the realm of infinity. Now, of course, the theists will say there's different realms. There's the transcendental realm where God is and maybe sometimes descends from, and that we are in the finite realm. But it does not matter. It's still existence. If the God exists and we exist, which is self-evident, then we all share the same thing, that is existence. It doesn't matter the realm or the dimensions of it. Existence can only exist. So if there's an infinite aspect of that existence that always was, that has to be responsible, since it's a creator existence, part of existence, it has to be responsible for everything if it had the free will to choose not to do what it did. Do you understand? So it just comes down to blind faith, being in a cult, quite frankly. I'm not saying that in a negative way, it just is a cult. And it just doesn't measure up to the other perspective that everything is God, quite frankly. There is no personal being who's a controller. Just everything is existence, thus everything is God. There's nothing that you need outside of it. Existence already is the proof of itself. You don't need to magic some man in the sky, magic some prophets, magic man walking in the water, on water and stuff like that. So well done to her. You know me, guys, I could speak to the cows come home, but tell me what you think of her opinions, her arguments, and the Christians' arguments, and also what I said.